Welcome to Grammar Lesson R.2 on the preterite tense. This is a cumulative review of the entire preterite tense, all verbs, regular, irregular, category, and stem changers. These tenses also apply to previously learned reflexive and reciprocal actions. Whenever a reflexive or reciprocal action is present, you must include the pronoun in front. These are just new conjugations to work with. So what is the preterite tense? The preterite tense is the simple past tense. It's just like in English when we add ed to say walked, talked, hopped, or ran. As you know, there are two different past tenses in Spanish, and this one is the simple completed, short past tense. Completed actions. I went to the mall. One-time actions. My family once traveled to France. The start or finish of an action. Class ended 10 minutes ago. An action that interrupts another. The bell rang. Change in emotion. When I got the news, I became sad. Or a definitive time frame. We lived in the apartment for 3 years. Those are all preterite actions. Now, there are some words that help indicate that the preterite tense is needed. Those are the common trigger words. Ayer, anteayer, anoche, pasado, última vez, una vez, primera vez. These are not, by any stretch of the imagination, the only trigger words, but they are the most common, and they do indicate that an action is completed or a one-time type of action. So now, once you determine that the preterite tense is needed, how do you conjugate? Well, you conjugate the same as you would for the present tense by first removing the AR, ER, or IR ending. And then you add the corresponding preterite tense endings. For AR verbs, this would be aste, o, amos, astes, aron. Notice the accent mark in the yo form and the L form. For ER and IR verbs, iste, io, imos, istes, ieron. Again, accent marks in the yo form and the LA form. Now, car, gar, zar verbs are sometimes taught separately. These are not technically irregulars, they just undergo a spelling change. These three types of verbs, car, gar, and zar, are all AR verbs, so we want to focus our endings on the AR column. The only thing is that in the yo form, they have to undergo a slight spelling change to maintain the sound. So a car verb, if it was just CE, it'd go from car to say. To maintain the integrity of the sound, we have to spell it a little bit differently. QUE says K. The same thing happens with gar. If it was just GE, the sound becomes he instead of G. So for the integrity of the sound, we turn it to GUE, ge. Now, ZAR does not follow any type of sound rule. It's just a rule that Z and E can never be next to each other. So even when we make a word like lapis, pencil, plural, to lapises, the Z changes to a C. So the same thing happens here in the yo form. To avoid the ZE, we just merely switch the Z to a C. Now, after the yo form, these three types of verbs are completely normal. We'll just drop the AR, and you'll have casteco, gamos, gasteis, and zaron. So after the yo form, 100% normal on those verbs. Now there are 5 irregular verbs, and these verbs have no pattern. They have no rhyme or reason. They cannot be grouped with any other verb, like our category verbs, and so these 5 stand alone. Ser and ir happen to share the same conjugation in the preterite tense. So both ser and ir will conjugate fui, fuiste, fue, fuimos, fuisteis, fueron. The only way to differentiate when reading them is by context. Dar and ver are very similar as well. The only difference, the D or the V to start off the conjugation. Di, diste, dio, dimos, distes, dieron, vi, viste, vio, vimos, vistes, vieron. And then lastly, we have hacer. Hacer takes an odd spelling. We go A to I, we have a Z. So hacer follows the totally irregular pattern of hice, hiciste, hizo, hicimos, hicistes, hicieron. So now these are the 5 irregulars, and notice that none of them have accent marks. So that's kind of nice. Moving on to category verbs, these verbs are called category verbs because they share a commonality. And for category U and UV verbs, they undergo some type of spelling change that they all share that they all have in common, and then they all use the same endings. For the category U, we have saber, poner, and poder, and they become sup, pus, and pud. But then they use these new set of endings, which is kind of a mixture of AR and IR endings. Supe, pusiste, pudo, supimos, pusistes, pudieron. The same thing happens with andar, estar, and tener. Those are category UV. They all undergo a similar change in their conjugation that involves the letters U and V. Anduv, estuv, and tuv. And they also share the same endings with category U verbs. Anduve, anduviste. Estuvo, estuvimos. Tuvistes, tuvieron. Now category I is off to the right. The endings are the same as category U and UV. But category I verbs, instead of a U or a UV, they undergo a spelling change that involves an I. So venir becomes bin, querer becomes quis, and then we add our endings to that. There are some other category verbs that have different endings or little quirks about them that set them apart from the category U, UV, or I. These 2 categories of verbs are category J and I to Y verbs. The first category we'll look at is a category J. Now it functions just like the other categories U, UV, and I, but the ending is slightly different in the ellos, ellas form. So, just like other category verbs, these follow a pattern. They have a J. Decir becomes dich, traer becomes tra, and any verb that ends in UCIR will now end in UJ plus the new endings. Ooh. Now it looks almost identical, our set of endings here. E, iste, o, imos, istes. But it's the ellos and ellas form that is slightly different. We drop an I. So dijeron, not dijeron. Trajeron, produjeron. So that ellos form is the slight difference that kind of sets J verbs to the side. Now, I to Y verbs are slightly different. I to Y verbs undergo 2 special changes in their conjugation, and their endings are brand new. Their endings are just like our normal ER-IR verb endings, but with a tweak in 2 different spots. And this is because all of the verbs that are going to fall into this pattern are either ER or IR verbs. Verbs like oír, caerse, leer, or destruir, or influir. Verbs that end in EER or UIR. And what happens here is when we remove the IR in oír, and we go to put on OE, 2 vowels is okay. Oíste, 2 vowels is okay. But if we used our normal IR ending, we would get O-E-O in the L form. 3 vowels is not allowed in Spanish unless you can accent the middle vowel. And accents are a whole nother set of rules. Let's just say you can't accent the middle vowel here. So to avoid the triple vowel situation, we need to convert the I to a Y. Oyó. Oímos, oístes, oyeron. Caerse will have the same situation of encountering 3 vowels in a row where it's impossible to accent the middle one, so we have to convert the I to a Y. Me caí, te caíste, se cayó. Nos caímos, os caísteis, se cayeron. So the same thing is true for EER and UIR. When we remove the ER or the IR, we add iste, iste, yo, to avoid 3 vowels, imos, istes, and then yeron. The last type of verb we need to talk about are stem changers. And stem changers still exist in the preterite tense, just not as many. So in the present tense, we learned 4 different types of stem changing verbs: E to IE, E to I, O to UE, and our lone U to UE verb. Now, those verbs could potentially stem change in the preterite, but we have certain requirements that are needed. First off, it must be a stem changing verb. We can't spontaneously make a verb a stem changer. So if it was in our original list of E to IE, E to I, O to UE, or U to UE verbs, it could potentially qualify. But there's another requirement. Not only must it be a stem changing verb in the present tense, but it must end in IR. So if we have a verb like pensar or a verb like volver, they do not qualify. They are 100% normal in the preterite tense because AR and ER verbs cannot vowel change at all in the preterite tense. Only those stem changing verbs that happen to end in IR. And once we figure out if a verb meets those 2 requirements, then we can look at the possible rules that will apply to it. Well, if it is a stem changer that ends in IR, there are 2 allowable vowel changes. The E in that verb can change to I, and the O can change to U. Now, this is irregardless of what type of change it made in the present tense. This is a new set of rules for this verb. So even if it was E to IE in the present tense and it qualifies, it is now E to I. And even though in the present tense it might have been O to UE, now if it qualifies, it's O to U. And unlike the present tense, our changes, these vowel changes, happen in a different spot. They happen in the bottom 2 conjugations, the el, ella, and the ellos, ellas forms. So, as you're looking to add endings to these verbs, we use normal IR endings, so iste, io, imos, istes, and ieron. The verbs are going to be totally normal until they hit the io ending, and then we have to vowel change before that ending, and when they hit the ieron ending, they'll have to vowel change in front of that as well. But remember, only IR stem changing verbs can vowel change at all in the preterite. If you get a verb like devolver, it cannot change. Poder cannot change. Poder happens to be an irregular or a category verb. Let's see. Despertar, no vowel change for that verb. Okay, so let's see how much you've learned. Answer the questions that follow, and see you in class.